Welcome back to Reimagining Cyber. Now, for years we've heard that identity is the new perimeter. Organisations have invested billions in MFA, single sign-on, zero trust, conditional access, identity providers, and every acronym you can imagine. Yet every week we still see another major breach making headlines. Retailers, airlines, insurance companies, technology companies. So today we're asking, what are defenders still getting wrong about identity? And the main person we're asking is our very own cybersecurity expert, Tyler Moffitt. Tyler, how are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Okay, if you could just kick things off for us then, what's the first thing we should be talking about here?
I think the first thing that we should say is, identity security isn't failing per se. It's still absolutely the most important investments organizations can make. Maybe one of the most important, layer in a layered solution. We've always talked about identity as a new perimeter, but I would say the mistake is believing that identity alone is enough to sort of stop all these attacks or most attacks, right? Attackers have adapted essentially, and defenders need to adapt as well.
One phrase I've heard you use recently is that attackers aren't breaking in anymore, they're logging in. What do you mean by that?
So for years, cybersecurity, they've always assumed attackers have to defeat security controls, right? Usually exploits, right? Come in, exploit a vulnerability, that's their back door, that's their way in. Or they drop a piece of malware from somebody, falling for phishing, and then that's their way, creating persistence, and that's the foothold, right? And they bypass antivirus through however they get people to trick. There's click fix, there's lots of things going on, right? That's all still happening. But increasingly, attackers are starting from a completely different place. And this is basically, especially the past, I'd say, year and a half or so, they just buy it. They just buy the stolen credentials. Buy the stolen browser sessions, or they purchase OAuth tokens. They basically just like socially engineer help desk, right? They purchase access from initial access brokers. They were probably made the most famous back when that MGM casino thing happened, where Black Cat at the time, which then changed into Alpha V, which then changed into Ransom Hub. I know it's a lot. They always rebrand whenever the FBI goes after them. But anyway, Black Cat was the one made famous going after the casinos. And you have to realize they weren't even the ones that actually broke in. They were just the noisy ransomware payload at the end. They bought access from an access broker, specifically Scattered Spider at the time. And so they're just inheriting trust. And that's a huge shift here.
So I guess they're showing up with a valid badge instead of just climbing through a window.
Yeah, I mean, you already have a trusted identity that you've bought, right? You just look like every other employee. You aren't triggering any malware alerts. You aren't necessarily exploiting like a vulnerability in some, unpatched VPN or appliance. You're using legitimate access, and that's why identity has become such an attractive attack surface.
One question listeners might have is that if attackers aren't breaking anymore, where are they actually getting all of these identities? Are they stealing them themselves?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, um, most of the time they're just buying them. The attackers that actually leverage the device or do something with it to a point that's like they're buying it themselves. But you have to realize that one of the biggest changes in cybercrime over the last few years is that these underground marketplaces, um, some of these groups are dedicated just to stealing access. They literally will break in, use a piece of malware like Lumra or Lumra Stealer, and steal these credentials and then do nothing with the breach or the environment that they've gone into. They just want to sell it. And so many corporations are currently for sale accesses, but nothing has shown up on their end. They've not been breached per se, or nothing has shown up that's noisy, if that makes sense. And so these underground marketplaces, you can just like they have stolen usernames and passwords, browser session cookies, authentication tokens, VPN, like remote desktop, you name it. All that stuff. It's only a growing, increasing list. I mean, it's been around, I would say, for the past maybe 5+ years, maybe even close to 10 years for some of this stuff. But it's now become like really well fleshed out to where they even have like a search where you can search for specific industries in countries and now like purchase it like you're going on Amazon type thing. I mean, it's pretty crazy. Trust has basically become a commodity.
Yeah, so attackers, they don't necessarily need to steal credentials anymore.
Right? You just buy it, right? And so when we hear terms like initial access brokers, these groups specialize in one thing. And these are the groups I was telling you about that they just get into organizations. They don't deploy ransomware. They don't steal any data. They just get access and then sell that access to someone else who'll then do the data exfiltration or do the ransomware, right? Um, it's basically become specialized. Each of these groups just focuses on improving their craft of whatever they're doing, whether it's just stealing the initial access or deploying ransomware that gets past security, or escalating privilege with tools so that way they can gain access to the shares so they can case the joint, look at finance data, see how much money is in the bank so you can't play games when it comes to, you know, ransom payments and then data exfiltration, all those things. They've just become very specialized.
And buying credentials isn't the only option.
Right. Not at all. We're seeing, a huge increase in that help desk social engineering that Scattered Spider made popular about a year and a half ago. Probably the best known example. I mean, they basically just made the playbook. Way more groups other than Scattered Spider are doing it. But instead of attacking technology with like exploits and vulnerabilities that come out, they're attacking processes. So they call the help desk, they impersonate an employee, and they convince them to reset an MFA, reset a password, or even enroll their new device. That's their device, right? 10 minutes later, basically have a completely legitimate account, no exploit, no malware, no 0 day, whatever, just effective social engineering, and they've got their way in.
That's arguably, I guess, almost more concerning than some sophisticated exploit.
Yeah, I mean, because it works. Organizations spend millions protecting against malware, and that's what they're prepping for, breaking in, when sometimes forgetting that the trust itself can just be manipulated. And then you add info stealers into the mix. User downloads malware, their browser sessions are stolen. I mean, the cookies are stolen, save passwords, everything you can get. A lot of these tools, like, they grab it all. They grab everything you'd possibly need, and then you've got, like, multiple different, these bundled logs essentially have multiple different SKUs that can be sold. And the attacker isn't defeating MFA, if that makes sense. They're basically inheriting a session where MFA was already completed. And that's what's super tricky here is depending on, the policies that are set with a lot of these permissioning of these tokens, um, they might last days. And then someone can just buy that token and then get in and completely defeat, or not even defeat it, just bypass it entirely, if that makes sense.
And we're looking then at multiple paths to exactly the same destination.
Right, exactly. They buy credentials, buy cookies, social engineer the help desk, purchase access from an initial access broker, exploit an info stealer victim. Right, there's tons of different techniques. It's ultimately the same outcome, a trusted identity. Right, and once attackers have that trusted identity, they're no longer trying to break into the organization. Right, they're basically just walking right through the front door with access granted.
So, what would you say is the biggest misconception that organizations still have?
I would say that identity is just a product. Um, I don't think it is personally. I would argue that identity is a strategy. Organizations sometimes think that, hey, we bought MFA, we implemented SSO, we rolled out zero trust, problem solved. But identity security, also includes the help desk procedures, the least privileged access, the lifecycle management, the monitoring, behavior analytics, incident response, security awareness, governance. I mean, tons of stuff. Technology is incredibly important, but technology without good process still creates these opportunities for attackers.
It isn't then really a technology problem.
It's a trust problem for sure. Every privileged action is a trust decision. Every session is a trust decision. And modern attackers they know that if they inherit trust, they inherit the access and they can walk right in.
Okay, then let's say that attackers they obtain a valid identity. What happens next?
So that's another place where I think defenders have an outdated mindset on what they think happens. And you know, imagine a breach happened where the attacker logged in. I mean, it's not even really a breach. I don't know when it's legitimate authorized access. There's no exploit being used, and so he's just walked right in. He's like considered legitimate traffic as an employee. the attacker is going to explore, right? They're going to map the environment. They're going to try and find servers, find what access they can, see who administrators are, right? Find backups, identify sensitive data if they can, and move laterally, right? Establish persistence, disable security controls, stage data, and eventually they achieve their objective. So they'll do the quieter things that don't raise suspicion first and take their time with that. But when it comes to like elevating permissions or disabling security controls, obviously they'll be quick with that because they'll usually likely have to use hacking tools to do all of that. And that's where they can eventually complete their objective, which is data exfiltration of sensitive, personal identifying information that would violate GDPR laws and be good for ransom, and then also deploy ransomware. And ransomware's kind of become optional now. It used to be like obviously required, super noisy, comes in, impact, interruption, encryption of your files, but they don't need to now. Just the data theft alone for some of these big organizations is more than enough to justify, getting a ransom payment. But the login wasn't the attack, right? It was just a starting point.
So the question shifts from how do we stop every login to what do we do after compromise?
So yeah, that's where cyber resilience I think comes incredibly important. That security posture, if you will.
Now, Tyler, sometimes when we talk about resilience or detection, people assume we're saying that prevention doesn't matter anymore. I guess you're going to refute that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, all that stuff matter. Like firewalls matter, email security matters, the DNS protection endpoint, EDR, MFA, like security awareness, all that stuff matters, right? Every one of those controls reduces risks. I think the mistake is expecting, any one of those controls to stop most attacks. And cybersecurity, I feel, has always been about layers, right? Cyber resilience is basically recognizing that compromise is possible and preparing for it, right? It's the assumption of when, not if.
So resilience, it isn't replacing prevention, it's completing it.
Yeah, I mean that's a way of looking at it. I think resilience is more like just a realistic mindset, right? Instead of asking, "Can we stop everything?" we're asking, "How quickly can we detect abnormal behavior? Can we limit lateral movement when we detect it? Can we reduce the dwell time, or can we recover quickly enough? Or have we tested our backups? Have we done tabletop exercises? Are we prepared?" Right? Those questions have huge impact on the business outcomes.
Okay, we're reaching the end of the episode now, so it's takeaway time. If listeners remember one thing from today's discussion, Tyler, what should it be?
I'm gonna cheat and give you two. First, I would say stop thinking of identities as something employees have. Start thinking of identities as like assets that criminals can buy, sell, rent, steal, you name it, trade it, whatever. That's the reality of today's underground economy. And second, don't leave this conversation thinking you need another layer or a security product. I would leave thinking different about identity. Attackers aren't breaking in anymore; they're just logging in. They're inheriting trust and instead of defeating security controls, right? That's why modern cybersecurity really, the posture isn't about prevention. It's about prevention as well as detection, response, recovery, and like resilience and all coming together and working together.
And that's really the shift, I guess, isn't it? The goal isn't to create an environment that can never be compromised. It's to build an organization that could detect abnormal behavior quickly, it can contain it, recover, and continue operating.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at cyber resilience. You got to assume compromise is always possible, reduce the dwell time, limit the lateral movement, protect your critical assets, do tabletop exercises to recover quickly to minimize your business disruption. I mean, that's going to be, those organizations that do that will be the most successful going forward.
And Tyler, if today's discussion has resonated with listeners, they can actually find out a bit more. Tell me what else is going on.
Yes. So I'm actually doing a webinar series called What Defenders Are Still Getting Wrong, where we take a much deeper dive into things like identity security or phishing or ransomware and basically what isn't stopping attacks and more importantly, what organizations can actually do about it. And so I just gave one last week. And so I'd be more than happy to give you a link to the series where you can watch on demand what episodes I have done and any upcoming ones.
Yeah, we'll put those on the episode notes. But can you give us a clue as to where we might find that?
Oh yes, no, they're on Bright Talk, and the series is called What Defenders Are Still Getting Wrong, but we'll provide it in the notes.
Tyler, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on, Ben. Always a pleasure.
And do remember to rate, review, and recommend Reimagining Cyber. We'll be back next week, myself and Tyler, with another episode. Goodbye.